All right, let's talk about future head coaches at the University of Nebraska. We're gonna have one for next year. We don't know who that one will be, but we have been having some fun with the coaching draft. Boomer, I think you had this graphic up last week, and somehow I'm missing a couple. I'm pretty sure if we roll back the tape, Blake Anderson is one of those that I'm missing, and maybe Gary Patterson. I can't remember.
Yeah, that takes work, Dave. We're not doing that.
Yeah, maybe our listeners can go back and see if I picked anyone else. I think there was a confusion with the snaking draft at some point, and but regardless, I'll point out a name that is on my list who became available today, and Matt Rhule, fired from the Carolina Panthers. Apparently, NFL teams have even more money than Big Ten teams because Matt Rhule has been fired. He still has $40 million left to be paid by Carolina. So that's a lot of money. And so he doesn't need to work, but he is available right away, right, Boomer? And Matt Rhule's been rumored as a potential candidate for from the get-go.
Yeah, his name has come up, and he did have success at the college level, which is different than some head coaches that you see that names get bannered about from the NFL, bring them in, but that doesn't always translate very well, as Nebraska history can suggest. Just because you had some vague success at the NFL level doesn't necessarily mean you translate to a college coach. We should know that more than anybody. But
yep.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I don't know. Do I love the idea of Matt Rhule here? I don't know. So that's a tough one, actually. I know he's a
Penn State guy, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that sounds right. Yep.
Pennsylvania, right?
And a few people have said he looks like Honky a little bit, so that's come up on
maybe we could do a body switch. Honky gets in there, calls the plays. Yeah. That'd be great. He's an offensive focused coach, even though he's had great defenses, and he kind of builds from the offensive defensive lines out, which I think Honky would love. Success at Temple and then at Baylor. Inherited programs that were, in weird spots, but not necessarily disasters either time. The Baylor one obviously was the Art Briles situation, and lost a lot of players and went like 2-10 his first year, and then kind of built it back up. But obviously a highly regarded coach that just didn't work out in the NFL, and that happens more often than not when you do the college to NFL transition. Does he want to come back? I don't know. Honky, what are your thoughts on Matt Rhule?
I don't really know a whole lot about him, to be honest with you. Yeah, he's not on my radar.
Besides, he looks a little bit like you.
Yeah, he is my doppelganger, I guess, or hanger, or whatever they call it. I think it's interesting when he took over at Baylor. It's different, but it's akin, at least, to taking over what like O'Brien did at Penn State, like a really tough situation that you're walking yourself into. And I don't know what the perfect coach here is. Boomer has said in the past he thinks the guy has to have X amount of head coaching experience. I don't want to put any limitations on anything right now. I want the right guy, and that's the biggest cop out of just saying whoever. I mean, Trev has this list of things he wants, and if maybe the guy doesn't have as much head coaching experience, or maybe somebody doesn't have as much college experience, or whatever it is, that doesn't seem to make him the perfect one. Well, whatever it is that makes him the right guy, in Trev's mind, that's what I'm looking for here. So Rhule, I don't know the first thing really. I don't know a whole lot about him. I know what he did a little bit at Temple, a little bit at Baylor, but this is going to be a whole different situation in those places too. I mean, Nebraska. I think that one of the most important things is whoever's going to be the next guy. I really do think it's crucial that there's a couple of guys that are on staff right now stay on staff to next year. And I think that's going to be important for whoever the next coach is. And assuming that it's not going to be Joseph. But if it's not Joseph, then next year we have a couple guys on staff that we really need to be able to have some continuity with what this team is doing right now. I go back to, Pliny getting hired here and them keeping Watson, keeping Gilmore, even for a couple of years. That helped with the transition when he had a lot of things to fix defensively and all that. Yep. It helped a lot to have a transition like that. And, my thoughts towards Bush and towards Mickey and what Mickey's doing with recruiting, what Bush does, period, recruiting, defense, special teams, wherever you want to put them, just outstanding coaches. I think there are guys that are on the staff that are going to be able to assist whoever ends up getting hired.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not uncommon that a handful of coaches from a former coaching staff transitions to a new coaching staff just for those purposes exactly, especially from a recruiting standpoint. Doesn't mean they may not be there forever. This instance, you may have somebody like Mickey and Bill Bush who obviously have Nebraska ties and may want to actually stay as long as they work well with a new coaching staff. Hard to say, right? Really hard to say, but it's definitely not unprecedented and could make a lot of sense. No doubt about that.
And
it's something
that's happened. A couple of our last coaching changeovers have been full house, switches when Riley took over and when Frost took over. I mean, there's absolutely no continuity. And no matter what you thought about the prior staff, there's still good coaches that, there's still one or two guys, what if Trent Bray would have stuck around on defense or, there's a whole list of things like that we have to learn from our prior mistakes. And moving forward, I mean, that's one of the reasons why these next 6 games are big too to me, is that there's still some good things going on right now. And we don't want to get to the end of the year and then just, wipe it all away because we hire XYZ coach and let's start over from scratch.
It feels like there is building some momentum there in the continuity, but so let's have one round of the draft here. Everybody look at their boards really quick. Honky, you can just say any name you want because I know you don't play the game. But we have to get the name right. That is the key. You're trying to get the name right. Boomer, why don't you start off first?
Oh God. God, what's even left out there? We're trying to make this quick and painless. Let's go. It ain't gonna happen. Let's go Mike Gundy.
I was gonna take Mike Gundy.
Yeah,
you took my pick, Boomer.
Well, I can trade for this and another pick to be named later. So
I do. I mean, Mike Gundy has Oklahoma State going again. I didn't expect it. Doesn't seem like I have a great team, but they are undefeated and looking pretty good out there. Let's see. I mean, let's double check who else we got here. You know what? I will go and I'll have fun here and take number 7 off the established Power 5 coaching list, Brett Bielema.
Ooh, interesting.
Well, I mean, maybe we have more money than Illinois. No, we probably have the same amount of money, but you never know.
Well, he's probably got a lot of red stuff still in his closet, so you could probably, that transition would be easy. So yeah,
it's true. Honestly, Honky, if you want Brett Bielema, I would switch with you. I've got another name on the list now that I just saw that I'd want to throw out just for discussion purposes. So,
well, I mean, I have a name, but there's no way in hell he's getting picked, and I'm not even saying I want him, but
go for it.
Well, I like Craig Bowl just for the altitude.
There we go. Craig Bowl.
He would know how to prepare.
I have his name up here somewhere, I think. There he is.
He's on the list. Yeah,
Craig Bowl.
All right, who's drafting for Rob?
What's that?
Ooh, I'll auto draft for him. I want to pick the least likely candidate. So let's see here. Let's see who he has already. Rob. Yeah, it's a horrible list of.
Well, he's got John Gruden and Sean Payton. That's good.
Yeah, leave it to Rob. Let's go with
David Shaw might be available before long. So.
Yeah, that's the name I actually was going to throw out. I'm gonna throw him Will Muschamp because I don't like. Whoops, sorry, I don't like Rob.
Well, I'll tell you what. Give me David Shaw just to because Craig Bull's not going to get it. So, and we actually want to try. If I understand the premise of this day, we actually want to try to have the name of the guy somewhere on our list.
Correct.
So that we can claim that we've said it.
We're bound to hit it eventually. So
yeah.
All right. So Honky's taking David Shaw, and Rob's taking Will Muschamp.
Yep, we got it done. All right.
The David Shaw thing is intriguing. I was listening to some of the local radio shows, and they're talking about diversity in coaching and all this type of stuff. And they're like, I mean, it's difficult because this is a current pool of candidates. If you're trying to have someone with experience, there's not a lot of African American coaches in the Power 5 that seem like they would fit the profile. David Shaw is one of those, and I would, 4 years ago, anybody would have jumped at David Shaw. He struggled though. Now it's interesting. I think you look at Stanford and you look at Northwestern, Georgia Tech has already fired their coach. Some of these schools that have the higher academic standards may continue to struggle post in the in the NIL era because it's harder to get transfers from the portal into schools from an academic standpoint, right? It's just, but they still lose them, right? I mean, like Northwestern lost a starting safety to Notre Dame last year because he good enough to go to Notre Dame and he wanted to do that, but it's harder to bring someone in to replace him of equal, talent or value, right? Because it's just not that easy to find. Your pool of candidates is that much smaller. David Shaw is a Stanford man through and through, right? Dream job for him. It's get paid well out there for West Coast pricing, I would imagine. But maybe he thinks that he's tapped out there. He can't go any further. And his record shows that. I don't think it would be a splash higher at this point from the fan base because, I mean, he's, has the same record as Scott Frost the last 4 years practically. But he sure looks like – go ahead.
Did he have any connection to Scott Frost being Stanford guys? Were they there at the same time?
I don't think so. Think so. But Boomer, I don't know if you can do any quick research on that. That's a good point. I never really thought about that.
He was very successful, though, to your point, 10 years ago or whatever, 10 years ago.
Multiple Rose Bowls, top 5 finishes, obviously the Heisman Trophy candidacy of Christian McCaffrey. And you're talking about building off of what Harbaugh had there with the big offensive lines and the run game. I mean, really sound coaching seems like.
Always go back to Stanford from 91 to 94.
So you would have been there when Frost was there in 93, 94.
Yeah, that's funny. I never thought about that.
They would have doubled up a little bit. I just think it's important to keep framing this discussion around what we do know Trev talked about the day that he fired Frost, and it was, we want guys that are going to be coaching toughness here, and we're going to win in the trenches and the grinder. We're going to grind. I want a guy that's going to be there, and so all these guys that we talk about, we have to keep applying kind of what we do know Trev is looking for towards that person, at least to the best of our knowledge. Again, like I said, with a guy like Rhule, I don't know what Rhule is from a grinding standpoint or any of that stuff, but we'll no doubt find out more, I'm sure, and learn more about these guys here in the coming weeks as it gets a little clearer. Is there anyone you think that's fallen off the list? Like I was talking with a guy today saying Campbell's done. Campbell's not on the list now because of their losses. I mean, do you buy that?
No, I mean, that was the exact same conversation with David Shaw. You could argue Shaw shouldn't be on this list because if he's announced as the head coach, on November 29th or whatever, and he went 4-8 this year and he went 4-8 last year and went 2-9, whatever, they're going to be like, are you kidding me? You just hired some guy who, has 4 straight losing seasons. Doesn't say anything about what he did the 6 years previous to that. Matt Campbell's kind of the same boat. He might go 7-5 this year. But what he's accomplished at Iowa State, a place that before he got there hadn't done anything compared to what he did, is you have to look at the entire resume, right? So would it not land well with some portion of the fan base? Yeah. Does that mean he's the wrong guy? That's probably too much of a recency bias on making your decision. I guess to me, and Boomer, tell me if I'm wrong, but because you're in the insurance industry, but to me, this is all an exercise in like risk mitigation or risk management, right? You're trying to actually, through all this criteria that Honky is, saying that Trev is using essentially, is all you're trying to do is take the least risky choice here that you have available, right? Every candidate we can find has a fault of some sort, right? We just found, Matt Rhule hasn't beat a top 25 team, right? David Aranda's only been there for 3 years, and he inherited a good situation at Baylor. Lance Liepold, won mostly at the Division III level and doesn't have that much Power 5 experience, and it's the Big 12, and will his offense work here? You can find a fault in everything. But when you look at the criteria, you're simply trying to find coaches that have the least likelihood of failure or the most likelihood of success, right? And that's all you're trying to do. It's literally an actuary table, I guess, in my mind.
I think of the right guy statement that Trev is looking for, whoever the right guy is. And it's not about trying to find an offensive guy, defensive guy, a Power 5 guy, Group of 5, pro guy, college guy. We've done it all, right? Nebraska guy, not Nebraska. None of that matters. We need the right guy. And I was trying to think with Joseph. Joseph doesn't have the coaching history, certainly that Boomer stated that would match what Boomer's looking for, right? But At the same token, we've talked about these last 6 games. What would it take to get Joseph to almost be a non-negotiable? Like, you have to hire him. I don't think it would be 3-3. It wouldn't be just getting to a bowl game, although that would be amazing. That would be an amazing feat to get us to a bowl game. But I don't see being 6-6 anything where we're like, okay, it's definitely Joseph. All right, he goes 4-2, so now we're 7-5. Hey, you're getting closer there. Probably not quite enough yet. He goes 5-1, and we finished the season 8-4, and we've beaten everyone except for Michigan. It's a close loss to Michigan. We're 8-4. And what is the cutoff point where we're like, whoa, what this guy did was pretty amazing. On top of that, you do have the Nebraska ties, which I think you can factor in at some point with enough wins. You have the Trev ties with them. I go back to the Big Red wrap-up before the season started. Trev is getting interviewed by Michael Severe in North Stadium, and he's asked a question about Frost. Trev does, and Trev says everything right. He does, he plays it right and says the right things about Scott all off season. Then he was asked a question about Mickey, and he's like, "Oh yeah, Mickey, like my buddy, I played with him. Like there was a different his face lit up talking about Mickey compared to Frost. Just background, knowing him and everything." You mentioned David Shaw with the diversity thing. Obviously, Joseph. There's a lot of things. At what point does enough positive things happen in this season where we seriously look at Mickey as a long-term candidate?
That's a good question. Some of that, I think, does come down to, what conversations has he had with Alberts? Is this something Joseph wants? Does he want to be a head coach? I mean, because not everyone wants to be. I mean,
we've heard things both sides on that, haven't we?
Especially, if your love is recruiting and kind of real hands-on with players, head coaches can't really be that because they have all these other roles they have to do. As we heard with Frost, you've got to be that CEO of an organization. You can't be, on the road recruiting all the time. You can't be focusing on, just the wide receivers or just this. You've got so much more on your plate that not every coach wants to be a head coach. I mean, it's certainly possible Mickey may have just taken this job on knowing I need to write this and I'm a person who can do it, but I don't want to do this long term. I'm not saying he does or doesn't, but it's certainly a possibility. Yep. That's the first thing you have to consider. Yep. Does he want it? Maybe he does. And then if he does, and we do have to start trying to consider what is the cutoff for would we call this success or not? Is it a win total or is it just looking a certain way? I mean, I don't want to go to the whole close losses thing again. We've already had enough of that, but that is a good question. I don't know, like you said, I don't know if 6-6 would be enough, to get there, especially, with what we've, talked about this whole season just being goofy with the teams we've played and whatnot, although he was handed a pretty deep hole to get out of, when it started. But, I mean, that is a possibility. If you are in that 7-5 or 8-4, I mean, if you're Alberts, does your hand get called? You not have a choice, and you have to hire him. I don't know. So that's something else you have to look at.
Well, I wouldn't think of it as have to at that either, because if we were 8-4, I think fans would be.
Well, that's what I mean. There could be a lot of fan pressure to do that. Maybe Trev didn't, that wasn't his plan, but do you kind of don't have a choice at that point? I don't know.
I would say that going 8-4 obviously enters Mickey into very legitimate conversation, because now he's done something. Let's say if that somehow wins you the West, he's just won a division title. How many other coaches we're looking at has done that in a Power 5 league? Not too many, probably, right? So even if you're playing for that on the last day of the season, that'd be quite the accomplishment. So, but just the record alone, this is just like saying, well, just because Leipold is going to win 9 games this year at Kansas, he immediately obviously would have a great success in Nebraska. And there's a lot of other elements there. Dave Aranda won 11 games last year. Well, that means he'll win 11 games next year at Nebraska. No, that's not how it works, right? Matt Campbell went 7-5. He's off my list. No, I mean, I think you would have to say then, okay, Mickey's now you're proven that you can be a head coach here, but I want to know how you're going to move this program forward, right? Now it's the interview process, right? And he's had a lot of time to sell that to Trev the whole time, but you wanting to understand, like, okay, you haven't been a head coach ever before. Thanks for the success this season. Now let's talk about how we're going to do this together over the next 5 years to establish the culture, and the long-term winning that we want to see at Nebraska, right? So what are you going to do from a recruiting perspective? What are you going to do from player development? How are you going to fill out the rest of your coaching staff? All these type of things that you're going to expect a head coach to know how to do. What are you going to change with your practice schedule? How are you going to handle, all that type of stuff, right? And then Trev will be like, all right, and then I'm just going to compare Mickey to my other candidates who I'm going to interview and understand how they would go about, building long-term success in Nebraska, right? Just going 8-4, it won't be enough. It shouldn't be just that thing. If this is a deeply analytical analysis, is that repetitive, Boomer? But of who you think is going to have the most likelihood of success at the head coaching position in Nebraska, you have to take it all that into consideration. It's not just one thing, right?
Well, and to your point there, Dave, that's once again to go back to what Trev said on the day when he fired Frost was that we're going to create a process here. We're going to create a process, and we're going to write down our values. And I mean, he's going to use these 2 months to clearly identify what he wants. Because to your point, it isn't just as simple as 8-4, you're in, 9-3 at Kansas, you're in, 7-5 at Iowa State, you're out. It's not as simple as that. He is writing down. At least in my mind, he's writing down what he wants in a coach, and it's clearly defined. And then, he'll go and look through 5, 10 coaches, whoever, I don't care, 15, 20 coaches, and match them up as who aligns to what I'm looking for here. And it might be someone that the general population wants, and he's sitting there saying that's not what I'm looking for. That goes back to that right guy thing, and I can't define what that is. But it's just the right guy. Bob Stoops at Oklahoma took over a dumpster fire, right, and had no coaching experience, but he was the right guy at one moment. And, popular hire too, don't get me wrong, but still, it's just the right guy. And sometimes the right guys, we thought Scott Frost was the right guy. And, it didn't work out. So there's no guarantees no matter what.
Well, one random thing maybe to kind of tie this up a little bit, something that I thought about today was with that right guy idea. Is, we've said before, and it's probably pretty obvious that if you're going to become the head coach of Nebraska or any really Power 5 program, head coaches have an ego, right? I mean, they're like, I'm going to get that done. I can get that done. I know I can do this, right? You're not going to take this job without having an ego to say that I'm the guy to get it done. But if you think about T.O., right, what was so amazing about him is that he had this amazing track record, but he was so, unassuming, right? Like it was never about him, right? It was about the players and the process and building up his players to be, young men and pillars of society and all this type of stuff, right? It was a philosophical approach to building that culture. It wasn't about him ultimately, right? He was actually not about himself. So he believed he could obviously coach at Nebraska. He did it for 25 years, but it wasn't about like him, right? So I would be interesting from a Trev Albert standpoint, when you think of that criteria, and Mickey Joseph kind of fits that mold of like, hey, this is not about me. It's about the N on the helmet, right? You need to find a coach that gets that, believes in themselves, but also believes in the bigger mission of the athletic department and the university, right?
Well said.